Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them.
Story 1. The Last Countdown in Red Willow. Red Willow
Was the kind of small town that believed nothing ever truly changed. It sat at the edge of frozen farmland, surrounded by bare trees and fields that stretched so flat they made the sky feel closer than the ground. There was one main road, one grocery store, one gas station, and a town square that still displayed faded banners from celebrations long past. People grew up there, married there, died there, and most never left. New Year's Eve was the one night. Red Willow pretended it mattered every December 3rd. The town gathered in the square for the countdown. There were cheap fireworks, burnt coffee, a crooked stage, and a giant digital clock mounted above the old courthouse. At midnight, everyone cheered, hugged, and told each other the same lie. This year will be different. But in Redwood, New Year's Eve wasn't about the future. It was about keeping the past quiet. Ethan Cole returned to Red Willow after 10 years away, just hours before the last day of the year ended. His mother had died 2 weeks earlier, and the house he grew up in felt smaller than he remembered, like it had shrunk around old secrets. He hadn't planned to stay for New Year's, but the weather turned ugly. Snow fell heavy and fast, cutting off the highway. Red Willow closed itself like a fist. By late afternoon, the town felt wrong. No music played from windows. No kids ran through the streets. Curtains stayed drawn. People moved quickly, heads down, as if afraid of being noticed. At the grocery store, Ethan overheard 2 older men whispering near the freezer aisle. "Clock's still working, right? It always works. Good, we don't need another." They stopped talking when Ethan passed at the register. The cashier, a woman he vaguely recognized, froze when she saw his name on the credit card. "You're staying tonight?" she asked, just until the road's clear. Her fingers tightened around the receipt. "Then don't miss the countdown," she said. "Everyone needs to be there." It wasn't a suggestion. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his childhood home, flipping through old photo albums. He noticed something strange. Every New Year's Eve photo stopped after a certain year. No pictures from the last decade, just one photograph, tucked into the back of the album, a blurry image of the town square at night. People stood frozen mid-cheer, faces distorted by motion blur. And in the background, behind the stage, there was something dark and tall that didn't belong. A shape that looked like a person, but was on at 11:30 p.m. Church bells rang once. Red Willow's signal. Ethan stepped outside and joined the silent flow of people heading toward the square. No one spoke. No one laughed. Children were clutched tightly by their parents. Some people cried openly without wiping their faces. The digital clock above the courthouse glowed red. 11 hours, 44 minutes, and 12 seconds. Ethan pushed through the crowd until he found Sheriff Mallory, a man who had known him since childhood. "Why does everyone look terrified?" Ethan asked. The sheriff didn't look at him. "Because we're almost out of time." "What happens at midnight?" Mallory finally met his eyes. "We make sure the year changes." The countdown didn't start at 10. It started at 60. The crowd joined in reluctantly. 60. 50. 50. With every number, the air grew heavier. Ethan felt pressure behind his eyes, like something was pressing inward. The red glow from the clock reflected off faces that looked less human by the second, mouths stretching too wide, eyes too focused. At 30, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath turned white. Frost crept across the courthouse windows. At 20. Ethan heard it, a low humming sound beneath the counting, not mechanical breathing. At 10. The stage lights flickered, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw figures standing behind the crowd, tall and thin, their bodies bending at wrong angles. No one turned around. 3, 2, 1, the clock hit midnight. Nothing happened. No fireworks, no cheers. The red numbers froze. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. The humming stopped. Then the screaming began. The digital clock glitched violently, flashing numbers that made no sense, years jumping backward, dates overlapping. The courthouse doors burst open, and something poured out. Not a thing, a moment. The air rippled as if time itself had torn open. People near the stage collapsed instantly, bodies hitting the ground like dropped mannequins. Others aged in seconds, hair turning white, skin sagging, voices cracking mid-scream. Ethan felt someone grab his arm. Run. Sheriff Mallory shouted, but the crowd couldn't run. They were being held in place. Behind the stage, the tall shape Ethan had seen in the photograph stepped forward. Its body looked stitched together from shadows and flickering light. Where its face should have been, there was only a glowing red countdown that kept resetting. 9, 8. It spoke without a mouth. You promised us the year. Memories slammed into Ethan's mind, memories that weren't his. Decades ago, Red Willow had faced collapse. Crops failed. People vanished. Time itself seemed to rot. On one desperate New Year's Eve, the town made a bargain with something that lived between seconds. Every year, they would gather. Every year, they would count. Every year, they would give time back. Not hours, not days. People. The clock began counting down again. And this time, it was counting names. Ethan saw his mother's face flash on the screen. Then his own. The thing stepped closer. New year, it said. And someone must stay behind. The clock began to scream. Not an alarm. Not a siren. A sound like metal being torn apart while something alive tried to breathe through. Its names burned across the red display above the courthouse, one after another, each appearing for only a second before being dragged away by static. People screamed as they recognized them. Parents collapsed when their children's names appeared. Husbands clawed at the air when their wives vanished mid-sob. Bodies folding inward as if time itself had reached inside them and pulled something essential out. Ethan couldn't move. The thing behind the stage stepped closer, its shadow stretching across the square, swallowing the fallen. Its body flickered between moments, sometimes tall, sometimes collapsed inward, sometimes splitting into multiple overlapping versions of itself. The sheriff shouted orders that no longer mattered. This wasn't the deal. Someone screamed, "We gave you enough." The thing tilted its head. "Time is never enough," it replied. "You taught us that." The memories flooded Ethan harder now. The truth, Red Willow hadn't just been failing decades ago, had been stuck. Days repeated. Seasons stalled. Children were born, but the future never seemed to arrive. The town had begun to rot quietly inside a single year. That was when the clock appeared. No one remembered installing it. It was simply there one December, mounted above the courthouse, glowing red, counting towards something only it understood. The bargain was simple. Every New Year's Eve, the town would gather. They would acknowledge time. They would feed it back. And in return, Red Willow would move forward slowly, painfully but forward. Most years, the thing only took one, sometimes two. But tonight, the clock had stalled, the countdown had failed, and now it wanted balance. Ethan felt his chest tighten as his name flashed again, Cole. Ethan, P&D. His mother's face appeared beside it, frozen mid-smile. A voice echoed from everywhere at once. Blood of the town may choose. The crowd turned toward Ethan, not angrily, not pleading, relieved. Sheriff. Mallory grabbed him. You left, the sheriff said through clenched teeth. You don't belong here anymore. Ethan shook his head. I was born here. That's enough. The thing leaned closer, its form stabilizing as if pleased. 1 year, it said. 1 anchor. Ethan understood then. Someone had to stay inside the moment. Someone had to be claimed, not just as a body but as a reference point. A fixed second, a living timestamp. If he accepted, the countdown would complete. The year would change. The town would survive. At least for now. Ethan looked around at Red Willow, the people who had trapped themselves in the same lie every year, telling each other this year will be different while feeding time their neighbors. He laughed once, quietly. You don't want me, he said to the thing. The clock flickered. Why? Because I won't stay still. Before anyone could stop him, Ethan ran straight toward the courthouse doors. The thing shrieked, the sound ripping open the air. Shadows lashed out. But Ethan crossed the threshold as the clock hit. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 1 second inside the courthouse. Time broke, rooms overlapped, weddings and funerals stacked on top of each other. Clocks spinning backward, calendars bleeding dates. At the center of it all was the clock's heart, a glowing core of compressed seconds, screaming to be released. Ethan didn't hesitate. He shoved his hands into the light. Every new Year's Eve Red Willow had ever stolen exploded outward. Time rushed forward all at once. Outside, the square erupted in blinding white light. The thing screamed as its form unraveled, stretched too thin across too many years at once. The clock shattered, red numbers spilling into the sky like burning embers. When the light faded, people collapsed dead, but empty, gasping as if waking from a lifetime-long nightmare. The courthouse clock tower was gone. So was Ethan. Morning came. The snow stopped. The roads reopened. Phones worked again. Red Willow looked older. Buildings were cracked, paint peeled. Years of decay settled in overnight, as if time had finally caught up. No one spoke about what happened. They couldn't. New Year's Eve passed the following year without a gathering. No countdown, no clock, just silence. But sometimes, very late at night, when the town is quiet enough, people swear they hear counting, not forward, backward, and in the reflection of dark windows. A man stands where the courthouse once was, watching the seconds pass, refusing to let them be stolen again. Because Red Willow finally moved on, but Ethan stayed behind, holding the last moment together, making sure the year always changes, even if it costs him forever. Story 2, the fireworks that kept coming.
Back the
Town of Briarwood Ridge. Saturday, so far off the main highway that even delivery drivers complained about it. One road in, one road out. A water tower with peeling paint. A single grocery store that closed at sundown. If you didn't grow up there, you had no reason to pass through. I grew up there, and every year, on New Year's Eve, something went wrong. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough that people stopped celebrating the way other towns did. No big parties, no bars stayed open late, no fireworks after midnight, except one, the same firework at exactly 12:07 a.m. Every year, a single explosion echoed from the old quarry on the east side of town. Just one, not bright, not colorful, just a dull white flash in the sky, followed by a sound that felt heavier than it should have been, like something hitting the ground instead of exploding above it. People stopped asking questions. About it years ago, so did I, until the year I decided to leave. I was 24 and packing my car to move out of Briarwood Ridge for good. New job, new city, new life. I planned to leave the morning of January 1st. Just after sunrise, my parents didn't try to stop me. They just asked one thing: "Don't drive tonight." My mother said, "It's New Year's Eve," I replied. "I'm not leaving until morning." She nodded, relieved, but not for the reason I expected. That night, the town gathered like it always did. Not downtown, not together. People stayed in their homes, watching the clock alone or with family, pretending this night was no different from any other. At 11:59, my father muted the TV. We counted down quietly, 10.9.8. At midnight, nothing happened. No cheers, no fireworks, no hugs, just silence. Then, at 12:07, the sound came. Boom, the windows rattled. The floor vibrated slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off and then stopped. My father exhaled slowly. "Same as always," he said, but this time, something was different. I felt it before I saw it. A pressure in my ears, a faint ringing, like after standing too close to a speaker. Then the boom came again. Same sound, same direction. Boom, my mother stood up. "That's not right," she whispered, because it was never twice. We went outside. Lights were turning on across the neighborhood. Doors opening. People stepping onto porches with the same confused expressions. And then, boom. A third time, the sky above the quarry flickered white. Not like fireworks, but like a camera flash held too long, and something fell, not fast, not slow. It drifted downward, tumbling end over end, disappearing behind the tree line. The town went silent in a way I'd never heard before. No dogs barking, no wind, no insects, just breathing. Then, screams from the direction of the quarry. Someone shouted a name. Another boom echoed, closer this time, as if the sound itself was moving toward us. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. You weren't supposed to see it. I turned to my parents. They were staring at the sky, not confused, terrified. "Dad," I said, "what happens at the quarry?" He didn't answer. Another explosion shook the air. But this one didn't come from above. It came from the ground. The earth itself seemed to crack, and with it came a smell burnt metal, wet soil, and something sweet that made my stomach turn. Lights began flickering across town, and then the fireworks started coming back, not launching, returning white. Shapes streaked upward from the quarry, moving backward through the sky, rewinding explosions that had already happened years ago. Each one ended with a name echoing through the streets, spoken in voices that didn't belong to anyone. Present, my name was the last one spoken, and That's when I realized something horrifying. The fireworks weren't celebrations, they were markers, and Briarwood Ridge wasn't counting down to a new year, it was counting how many people it could afford to lose before time noticed something was wrong. By 11:58 p.m., Glassford was no longer celebrating the new year. The crowd still stood in the square, still holding paper cups and phones raised toward the sky. But something essential had drained from them. The noise had thinned. Laughter came late, like it was being remembered instead of felt. Even the children had gone quiet, their eyes fixed upward, waiting for something they couldn't explain. The fireworks launcher stood alone. At the center of the square, silent, a black iron spine pointed at the sky. Smoke from earlier explosions hung frozen above the rooftops, unmoving, as if the night had been paused mid-breath. I waved my hand through the air. The smoke didn't drift. It didn't react. The wind was gone, so were the stars. I checked my phone, 11:58 p.m., then it flickered. 11:57 p.m., a murmur rippled through the crowd as others noticed the same thing. Car radios crackled and died. Digital billboards blinked and reset. The church clock, which had always run 2 minutes fast, began ticking backward with an uneven, stuttering rhythm. Tick, tick, backward. The mayor stood near the platform, pale and sweating despite the cold. He kept checking his watch, tapping it like it was broken. I pushed toward him. "You said this happens every year," I said. "You said the fireworks fix it." He didn't answer. At 11:59, the first firework launched. No ignition sound, no cheer, it simply left the launcher, slicing upward through the frozen smoke and exploding overhead. But there was no light. Instead, the square filled with sound. A single scream, high-pitched, terrified. The scream of a woman. People recoiled. Someone dropped their phone. A child started crying. Then another firework launched. And another. Each burst carried something different. A man begging, a prayer spoken in Latin, the wet crack of something breaking. I recognized one instantly, my father's voice, clear, as if he was standing behind me, whispering my name the way he used to when he was trying not to wake me. My knees nearly gave out, all around me. People were reacting the same way, collapsing, clutching their heads, shouting names into the air. A woman near the fountain screamed that she could hear her son, who'd drowned years earlier. An old man dropped to his knees when he heard his wife laughing. The exact laugh she'd had the night before she died. The fireworks weren't random, they were specific. The sky was giving the town its dead back, one sound at a time. The church bell began to ring. No one had touched it. Each toll echoed twice. The second echo delayed, warped, like time itself couldn't decide when the sound belonged. I grabbed the mayor by his coat. "Make it stop," I shouted. "You said midnight ends this." He looked at me then, and for the first time, his smile was gone. "It used to," he whispered. "Used to." He pulled free from my grip and stared at the launcher like it was a coffin. "Glassford doesn't move forward," he said. "It never has." The truth came out in fragments. Decades ago, the town learned something passed over them every New Year's Eve. Not a thing, not exactly, but a tear. A place where time thinned and folded back on itself. Without intervention, the town would relive the same night endlessly, trapped in the final minutes of the year. The fireworks were built to fight it. Each explosion marked a moment forward. Anchors in time. A way to drag the town with a year as it turned, but anchors wear down, and people forget why they were built. That was why the fireworks came. That was why no one remembered when the celebration first started feeling wrong. At 11 hours, 59 minutes and 30 seconds. The sky darkened completely. The smoke overhead began to twist, spiraling inward, forming a massive black ring directly above the square. Inside it, images flickered, like a broken film reel. The same crowd, the same cheers, the same countdown, over and over. I understood then these weren't memories, they were failures. Glassford had already reached midnight countless times, and been dragged back every time the anchors failed. Each reset shaved away a little memory, just enough to keep hope alive. That's why some people in town never seemed to age. That's why newcomers always felt watched. That's why the fireworks kept returning. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 20 seconds. The ground began to tilt. Loose decorations slid across the pavement toward the ring. A parked car lifted an inch off the street before slamming back down. People grabbed lampposts, each other. Anything solid. The mayor climbed onto the platform. "It needs a new anchor," he shouted over the rising wind. "Something that isn't tied to the loop." His eyes found me. "You arrived this year," he said. "You're not bound yet. A living anchor. A human point for time to follow." The launcher powered on by itself. Gears screaming. Cables writhing like veins. The ring above widened, pulling harder now. Roof shingles tore free. Christmas lights snapped and whipped through the air, like wires. I ran, not away, toward the launcher. If time wanted an anchor, it wouldn't be me. I climbed onto the platform as the final countdown echoed from every radio in town. 5. I turned the launcher sideways. 4. The mayor screamed something I couldn't hear. 3. The ring pulsed. 2. I aimed at the center of the tier. 1. Midnight hit. The firework fired directly into the ring. There was no explosion. The world folded inward. Light collapsed. Sound vanished. I woke on the highway outside. Well, Glassford should have been no town, no square, no fireworks, just an empty exit ramp and a rusted sign. "Welcome to Glassford EST 1891, closed permanently." Laughed. I cried. I drove away without looking back. For 3 miles. Everything was normal. Then my dashboard clock flickered. 11:59 p.m. The radio crackled too. Life, crowd noise, cheering, a familiar voice counting down. Looked in the rearview mirror. Red light bloomed. Behind me, a firework rising. Again. Story 3. The night the countdown never
Ended.
No one in Ravens Hollow celebrated New Year's Eve anymore. They still pretended to. The town sat deep in the northern hills, far from highways and cell towers, a place most people passed through once and never remembered clearly. One main road, a shuttered factory, a frozen lake, and a town square dominated by an old iron clock mounted on a stone pillar. The clock had been there longer than anyone alive could. Remember, it had never been replaced. It had never been repaired, and according to the town records that stopped abruptly in the late 1970s. It had never once struck midnight. People laughed when outsiders mentioned it. Old clocks broke. Old towns forgot things. That was Raven's Hollow's excuse for everything. But every December 31st, something changed. The air grew heavier as the sun went down, like the sky was pressing closer to the ground. Radios crackled more than usual. Dogs refused to leave their houses. And every single person in town felt the same creeping pressure in their chest as the clock crept toward 11:59. The countdown always began, and it never finished. I learned this the year I came back. My name is Caleb Moore, and I grew up in Ravens Hollow. I left the day I turned 18, swearing I'd never return. I built a life in the city. Told people my hometown was forgettable, harmless, boring. I believed that until my mother called me 3 days before New Year's Eve. "You need to come home," she said. Her voice sounded distant, hollow, like she was speaking from underwater. "Why?" I asked. There was a pause. Long enough that I thought the line had dropped. "Because," she whispered, "it's starting again." She hung up before I could ask what she meant. I arrived on December 30th. The town looked smaller than I remembered, grayer. The buildings leaned inward, as if listening. Holiday decorations hung in windows, but they looked untouched, dusty, like they'd been put up years ago and never taken down. No one was outside at the diner. The bell over the door rang, but no one greeted me. A few locals sat in booths, staring into untouched cups of coffee. Every face turned when I entered. They recognized me. No one smiled. "You shouldn't be here," the waitress said quietly as she poured coffee I hadn't ordered. "I got a call," I replied. My mum, her hand trembled. "She shouldn't have done that. What's going on?" I asked. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It read 11:58 p.m. It stayed that way for the rest of the night. That was my first warning. The second came when I visited my mother's house. She had aged far more than she should have. Deep lines carved her face, her eyes constantly flicking toward the window, toward the town square barely visible through the trees. "You remember New Year's here," she said. "I remember fireworks, music, people counting down." She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "You remember what we let you remember." That night, sleep wouldn't come at exactly 11:57 p.m. The town went silent, not quiet, silent. No wind, no insects, no hum of electricity. Even my own breathing sounded too loud, like it didn't belong. Then the speakers in the town square crackled to life. A voice began the countdown. Not a person, not a recording. Something layered. Dozens of voices speaking as one. 10. I stepped outside. People were emerging from their homes, moving like sleepwalkers, all drifting toward the square. Their faces were pale, eyes glassy, mouths moving in sync with the numbers. 7. I tried to stop a man I recognized from high school. "Hey, listen to me." He looked through me, not at me. 4. The clock's second hand twitched, then stopped. 3. Fireworks exploded overhead. Bright, deafening, beautiful and wrong. They didn't fade. They stayed frozen in the sky, sparks hanging like shards of glass. 2. The voice faltered. The entire town held its breath. 1. Nothing happened. The clock did not strike. The fireworks did not fall. The voice stuttered, glitched, screamed. Then 10. The countdown started again. People screamed this time. Some dropped to their knees. Others clawed at their ears. I watched a woman slam her head against the stone base of the clock, sobbing that she wanted it to stop. The fireworks reset. The same explosion, the same pattern, dot over and over. Time wasn't looping. It was stuck. My mother grabbed my arm. "You see now," she said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "This is why no one leaves." "What is this?" I shouted. She looked at the clock. "At midnight," she said, "the town takes someone." The countdown restarted, and I realized with cold certainty this time, the clock was looking at me. The clock began its countdown again. 10. The frozen fireworks flickered, rewinding in the sky like a broken memory. Colors snapped backward into themselves, reforming the exact same explosion. My ears rang with a pressure that felt like my skull was being gently squeezed from the inside. People screamed, not all at once, one by one, as if each person was realizing the same truth at a different moment. This had happened before, many times. How many? I asked my mother, my voice shaking. "How many years has this been happening?" She didn't answer. She was watching the clock. 8. The iron clock face had no numbers anymore. I hadn't noticed before, but now I could see it clearly. Where the numbers should have been, there were faint grooves, scratches, carved deep into the metal, like tally marks. Hundreds of them. 5. I felt something tugging at me. Not physically, something deeper. A pull behind my eyes, behind my thoughts, like the town itself had finally noticed me. "Mum," I whispered. "What does the town take?" She swallowed. "Someone who remembers." The countdown reset again. The crowd surged backward as if hit by a wave. People collapsed into each other, sobbing, begging, praying. Some ran. Most didn't get far. The streets bent subtly, curving them back toward the square, no matter which direction they fled. "You left," my mother said. "That's why it chose you." The truth began to surface in fragments. Memories I hadn't known were missing. The last New Year's Eve before I left. The screaming, the blood on the snow. A boy my age dragged toward the clock while everyone watched in silence. I remembered now, they had chosen him because he was planning to leave. Just like me. I survived because he didn't. I said. My mother nodded. "Midnight is hunger," she whispered. "And hunger doesn't care about time." The voice boomed again. 10. This time, the clock moved. The second hand twitched forward. People gasped. The town leaned inward. I felt it clearly now, something massive beneath Raven's Hollow. Something ancient and patient, pressing against the moment between 1 year and the next. Midnight wasn't a time, it was a door, and the town was built on top of it. Why fireworks? I asked. My mother laughed softly, hysterically. "Because joy hides screams," she said. "And noise makes people look up instead of around." The countdown accelerated. 7, 6. The fireworks began to fall. Not fading, falling. Burning fragments rained down, freezing just inches from the ground. Suspended in mid-air, like a cage of fire. The clock chimed once, a sound so deep it rattled my bones. People began to vanish, not explode, not collapse, just disappear. Where they stood, the snow melted instantly, leaving dark, wet footprints that led nowhere. The town was feeding Caleb, my mother said suddenly, gripping my hands with desperate strength. "Listen to me. Midnight only takes one who still belongs to the future." What does that mean? It means someone who still wants to leave. The clock chimed again. I understood. Everyone else had given up long ago. They stayed. They aged. They stopped dreaming. They survived by becoming part of the town. I hadn't. I still imagined a life beyond ravens. Hollow, that made me dangerous. That made me edible. I won't let it. I said. My mother smiled for the first time. Since I arrived, you already are. The clock struck. 11:59. The first number change I had ever seen. The crowd screamed as the ground cracked open beneath the clock tower, revealing darkness that pulsed like a living throat. Wind roared upward, dragging decorations, people, memories into the opening. The voice returned, no longer counting, begging, stay. The clock reached midnight, for the first time in recorded history. Time shattered. I felt myself split past and present, tearing apart. Memories rushed back all at once. Every New Year's Eve sacrifice, every erased name, every lie told to children so they wouldn't remember the screams. I saw my mother as a young woman, standing where I stood now, choosing to stay so I could leave. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She let go. The darkness took her. The clock rang 12 times. Each chime tore something out of the town. Buildings crumbled into dust. Streets peeled away like old skin. The frozen fireworks finally hit the ground, igniting everything at once, and then silence. Morning came. I woke up on the highway, miles from Raven's Hollow. The town was gone. No smoke. No ruins. Just trees where streets had been. Maps don't show it anymore. People don't remember it ever existed. But every New Year's Eve, at exactly 11:59 p.m., I hear fireworks outside my window, even when no one else does. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, something waits hungry for the next town that forgets why midnight matters.
Story 4. The Last Call Before Midnight.
Town of Ravenport never celebrated New Year's Eve quietly, even after the factories closed, even after the railroad stopped running, even after half the houses sat empty. The town still gathered every December 31st like it was a promise written into the ground. People said it was tradition. Others said it was habit. A few said it was fear. Ravenport sat at the edge of a frozen river in northern New York, the kind of place where cell service dropped without warning and streetlights flickered even on clear nights. By day, it looked like any other dying town: boarded shops, rusted signs, to many churches. But at night, especially on New Year's Eve, it felt alert, as if it was listening. I came back to Ravenport after 12 years away. I told myself it was for closure. My mother had died in October, and someone needed to sell the house. I picked New Year's week because I thought the noise would make it easier. I was wrong. The first strange thing happened the night I arrived. I checked into the only motel still open on Route 9, just outside town limits. The clerk was an old man with cloudy eyes and hands that shook when he passed me the key. "Leaving before midnight?" he asked. "No," I said. "Why?" His fingers tightened on the counter. "Most people do," he replied. "The ones who know." I laughed awkwardly and took my key. I didn't ask what he meant. I should have. That night, I dreamed of the old Ravenport telephone exchange. It burned down when I was a kid. Everyone remembered that. What no one talked about was that the fire started at exactly 11:58 p.m. on New Year's Eve, 2 minutes before midnight, 2 minutes before the new year. In the dream, the building was whole again. Phones rang endlessly inside. the sound echoing like screams trapped in wires. And somewhere among them, one phone rang, differently slower, heavier, like it was meant for me. I woke up with my phone buzzing on the nightstand. No number, just incoming call. I answered without thinking. All I heard was breathing, then a voice, low, familiar. "And wrong, don't stay awake this year," it said. The call ended. I told myself it was stress, grief, the long drive. But the next morning, the town started proving me wrong. At the diner, a waitress recognized me immediately. "You're Ellen Mercer's boy," she said, her smile fading as soon as the words left her mouth. "You came back at the wrong time." "What do you mean?" I asked. She poured coffee I hadn't ordered. "Everyone does," she replied. Around us, the diner was full but quiet. Too quiet. People spoke in murmurs, eyes darting to the clock above the counter. It was only 9:17 a.m., but the way they watched it made my skin crawl. I spent the day clearing out my mother's house. It smelled like dust and old winters. In her bedroom, I found something that made my hands shake. An unplugged rotary phone sat on her nightstand. The cord had been cut clean. Beneath it was a sticky note, yellowed with age. "Do not answer after 11:59, no matter who calls." I stared at it for a long time. My mother never explained anything. Not when my father disappeared. Not when we left town. Not even when she was dying. Seeing that note felt like her final refusal to tell the truth. By dusk, Ravenport was changing. Strings of lights flickered on across empty buildings. Fireworks were set up along the riverbank. The town square filled with people dressed in winter coats and forced smiles. Loudspeakers were tested. Music played old, crackling recordings that skipped at the same places every year. I asked a man near the square why everyone looked so tense. "Because," he said, "not looking at me, midnight listens." I laughed again, nervous laughter this time. At 11:30 p.m., I felt it. The pressure, like the air, was thickening. Like sound was being wrapped in cotton. Even the music seemed distant, warped. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. I didn't answer around me. Other phones began to ring. One by one, some people answered immediately. Others hesitated. A few screamed and threw their phones into the snow like they were burning. A woman near the fountain answered hers and froze. Her face went slack, her eyes unfocused. Then she whispered, "I remember," and collapsed. No one helped her. At 11:57 p.m., the fireworks stopped. The music cut out. Every screen in town phones, tablets, TVs and storefronts lit up with the same message: incoming call. I felt my phone vibrate again. This time, the name on the screen made my blood run cold. Mom. Crowd held its breath. The clock tower ticked louder with every second. 11:58. I remembered my dream. The burning phone exchange. The voice telling me not to stay awake. My phone kept ringing. Las 11:59 all around me. People began answering. And the moment they did, Ravenport screamed. The ground shook. Streetlights shattered. Fireworks ignited on their own, exploding far too low, showering sparks over frozen faces locked in horror. People dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, mouths open in silent terror. I pressed my phone to my ear. "I don't know why, Mum," I whispered. The voice that answered was hers, but it wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking through her. "Time's up," it said softly. "You stayed awake." The clock struck midnight. and Ravenport answered the call. The moment the clock finished striking 12, the town went silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the wrong kind. The kind where even your heartbeat feels like it's making too much noise. The fireworks froze mid-explosion, hanging in the sky like burning flowers trapped in glass. Snow stopped falling. Smoke from shattered streetlights stood still, unmoving, like it had forgotten how to drift. Everyone who had answered their phone stood frozen, eyes open, mouths parted, listening. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen had gone dark. Around me, people slowly began to move again, but something was wrong. They weren't themselves anymore. The woman who had collapsed near the fountain stood back up, her joints moving stiffly, like she was being pulled by strings. Others followed. Dozens of them, hundreds. Their faces were calm now, empty, relieved, like something heavy had finally been taken from them. A man near me smiled wide enough to hurt his face. "It's done," he said. "We're not carrying it anymore." "Carrying what?" I asked. He looked at me with pity. "The years," he replied. "The memories, the waiting." Then he turned and walked toward the river with the others. That's when I noticed the sound ringing, not from phones, from everywhere. It hummed through the ground, the buildings, the frozen air itself. The same ringing I'd heard in my dream, thousands of phones, crying out through invisible wires. The old telephone exchange. I ran, past the square, past people standing still like mannequins, past others calmly walking into the dark, following something I couldn't see. The exchange had burned down decades ago, but my feet remembered the way like it had been carved into me. When I reached the empty lot, my stomach dropped. The building was there, whole, lit from within. The doors stood open. Inside, rows and rows of phones lined the walls, rotary, cordless. Payphones ripped from booths all ringing at once. The noise was unbearable. My head felt like it was splitting open, and at the center of the room stood something tall, thin, and made entirely of shadow and wire. It turned toward me. "You weren't supposed to answer," it said in my mother's voice. Images flooded my mind. Ravenport, decades ago. A town crushed by tragedy, mining accidents, frozen winters, slow deaths no one outside cared about. People prayed for relief, for rest, for a pause in the suffering. So they made a deal. Every New Year's Eve, the town would give something back, a memory, a year, a piece of themselves. The dead were never really gone. They stayed connected, carried through the wires, calling back every year to collect what was owed. The phone exchange was the heart of it, and I was never meant to come back. "You left," the thing said. "That breaks the circuit. What happens to them?" I asked. "They rest," it replied. "They forget. And if someone doesn't answer..." The ringing grew louder. "Then time remembers." I understood then my mother hadn't cut the phone cord to protect herself. She did it to protect me. I picked up one of the ringing phones. Every screen in the town lit up again. The shadow recoiled. "No," it hissed. "You don't belong here anymore." "I know," I said. "That's why this ends." I slammed the receiver down. The sound cracked through the building like thunder. Every phone went dead at once. The lights burst. The walls screamed. The exchange collapsed inward, folding like paper, burning from the center. I woke up on the frozen riverbank as dawn broke. The town was quiet, normal quiet, No fireworks, debris. No broken lights. No people wandering into the dark. By morning, Ravenport was just a dying town. Again, but something was missing. The clock tower no longer worked. No phones rang. No one remembered staying up for New Year's Eve, and no one remembered my mother at all. I left that same day. Weeks later, I got a new phone, new number, no voicemail. But every December 31st, just before midnight, it vibrates once. No call, no name, just a single notification that disappears before I can read it. And somewhere far away, I know Ravenport is still there, waiting, hoping someone new will answer next time. Story 5.
The bell that never rang at midnight.
One in Briarwood remembered when the bell stopped ringing. That was the strange part. The town had always revolved around it. The iron bell mounted above the old municipal building at the center of town. Every year on New Year's Eve, exactly at midnight, it rang once. Not 12 times. Not in celebration. Just once. Deep, hollow, final. People said it was tradition. People said it marked survival. No one ever said why. I returned to Briarwood after 12 years away. Just 3 days before New Year's Eve, my mother had died quietly in her sleep, and the house she left behind felt less like a home and more like something that had been waiting for me. Briarwood hadn't changed. That alone unsettled me. The same crooked lampposts, the same shuttered storefronts, the same silence that sat too close to your ears. Even the air felt rehearsed, like it knew what was coming at the diner. The waitress recognized me instantly. "You're back," she said, not smiling. "For the funeral," I replied. She nodded once and poured coffee I hadn't ordered. "Bad timing," she said, "because of the snow." Her hand froze for half a second. Because of the date. No one talked about New Year's Eve directly. They spoke around it, the way people talk about illnesses they don't want to name. I noticed it everywhere. The grocery store had no party supplies, no champagne, no noisemakers. Even the digital clocks in public buildings were covered with black tape at home. I found my mother's old journals stacked neatly in a drawer. She had written obsessively toward the end, not about memories or regrets, but about time. Pages and pages filled with the same phrases, repeated in different handwriting, like she'd been losing control of her own hand. "Do not celebrate. Do not ring anything if the bell rings. We lose another year." I assumed grief was coloring everything, until I spoke to Mr. Calder, the man who lived across the street. You'll hear it. He told me that evening, standing on his porch as the sun disappeared. "Or maybe you won't. That's worse. Hear what?" He glanced toward the town center, where the bell tower cut into the sky like a broken tooth, the space where it should be. I laughed nervously. "It's just a bell." "No," he said. "It's a reminder." That night, I dreamed of standing beneath the tower. The bell loomed above me, massive and rusted, its surface etched with names instead of dates. As the clock approached midnight, I realized something was wrong. The bell wasn't swinging. It was breathing. I woke up gasping at exactly Les 12 Alto M. My phone read December 29th. Over the next 2 days, the town grew quieter. People boarded windows. Families gathered indoors without explanation. On December 31st, Briarwood shut down entirely. Roads blocked. Power dimmed. No music. No laughter. At 11:45 p.m., I heard footsteps outside. Neighbors were walking toward the town center. Not quickly, not together, one by one. I followed. The square was filled with people standing in a wide circle around the bell tower. No one spoke. No one checked the time. The clock face above us was dark, its hands frozen inches before midnight. I spotted the mayor near the steps. "What's happening?" I whispered. He didn't look at me. "We're waiting to see if it remembers us," he said. "Who?" The bell moved. Just slightly. A low groan echoed through the square, metal shifting against ancient hinges. People clutched each other. Some cried silently. A woman screamed, "Don't let it ring." I finally understood. The bell didn't celebrate the new year, it counted how many years Briarwood had left, and it hadn't rung in a very long time. The clock hand twitched. Midnight arrived. The bell stayed silent. For a moment, relief washed over the crowd. Then the bell rang anyway, once from inside the tower, not swung, struck. The sound wasn't loud, but it was deep enough to sink into bone. The ground vibrated. Windows shattered. People collapsed, clutching their chests. And then the town lights went out. When they came back on, one person was missing. No blood, no struggle, just an empty space where someone had been standing. The mayor whispered. It took a year. I turned slowly toward the bell tower and saw the clock hands moving again, backward.
No one moved after the bell rang. The silence afterward wasn't relief, it was shock, the kind that settles when something irreversible has happened and the body hasn't caught up yet. Snow drifted through the square, landing softly where a person had been standing seconds ago. No footprints leading away. No sign of a struggle. Just absence. Someone whispered the missing man's name. Others followed, murmuring it like a prayer that didn't work anymore. The mayor broke the stillness. "Go home," he said, voice cracking. "Lock your doors. Don't look at clocks." No one argued. I walked back through the frozen streets with the feeling that something was walking with me, measuring my steps, counting my breaths. Every house I passed was dark, curtains pulled tight. Briarwood had survived another year, but it had paid for it. Or so I thought. At home, the clocks were wrong. Every single one. The microwave flickered between dates. December 31st, January 1st, December 18th, years that didn't make sense. My phone buzzed with notifications from the past, missed calls from my mother dated weeks before her death. And then I heard it. A faint ringing. Not loud. Not outside. Inside the walls. I tore through my mother's journals, hands shaking. Toward the back, the handwriting grew frantic, almost carved into the paper. The bell doesn't just take years. It returns them when it's hungry. That's when the dead start remembering they're dead. At 2:13 a.m., someone knocked on my door. I didn't open it. The knocking continued, slow and patient. Then my mother's voice spoke through the wood. "Please," she said softly. "I rang the bell once for you. Now it's your turn." The knocking stopped. I didn't sleep. At dawn, Briarwood looked wrong. People were outside, standing in the streets, staring at houses that shouldn't exist. Buildings long burned down were back. Cars from the 90s sat rusting beside modern ones. Children played in yards where no families lived anymore. Time was folding. Mr. Calder stood across the street, staring at his own house, except it was younger, freshly painted, with a woman waving from the window. "My wife," he whispered. "She died in '98. The bell tower loomed heavier than before. The clock hands were spinning now, grinding, fighting each other. Each rotation sent ripples through the town, people collapsing, screaming as memories that weren't theirs flooded in. I ran to the municipal building. Inside the tower, the bell was no longer iron. It was bone. Thousands of names were carved into it, layered over each other, etched deep enough to weaken the structure. Some were scratched out. Some were circled. I found my mother's name. Recently added. Behind the bell, a narrow stair descended underground. Beneath the tower was a chamber filled with clocks, hundreds of them, each labeled with a name and a year. Briarwood's years. Each time the bell rang, a clock stopped. Each time it rang without permission, time came back wrong. The mayor followed me down. We were supposed to keep it quiet, he said. No celebrations. No countdowns. Midnight without witnesses. Then why did it ring? I shouted. He looked at me. Because you came back. The bell needed someone who remembered life outside Briarwood. Someone who noticed time passing. Someone who could feed it properly. A keeper. The bell began to ring again, over and over now, not striking air but flesh. People screamed above us as years were ripped away and returned at random. Children aged decades in seconds. Old men became boys and vanished. The mayor shoved a ledger into my hands. Choose, he said. Ring it once, correctly. Give it a year. Or it keeps taking until nothing makes sense anymore. I understood then. The bell wasn't evil. It was starving. I climbed the tower as the town tore itself apart below. With every step, memories that weren't mine clawed into my skull, birthdays forgotten, funerals undone, futures erased. At the top, I pulled the rope. The bell rang. Once. Story 6. The night the year would not end. No one in the town of Ravens Hollow remembered when the New Year's Eve siren first started. That alone should have been impossible. Ravens Hollow was the kind of small town where everything was remembered, who cheated on their spouse in '92, whose house burned down in winter, who never came back from the mines. Memories stuck here like damp rot in old wood. Nothing ever truly faded. And yet, when I asked the town clerk why the siren wailed every year at 11:57 p.m., 3 minutes before midnight, her pen stopped moving. She stared at the page as if it had offended her. Then she said quietly, "It's always been there." That was my first warning. I had come to Ravens Hollow chasing a story. A forgotten town, population barely 900, tucked between forested hills where cell signals died and GPS maps glitched into blank space. Online forums whispered about a New Year's Eve tradition so unsettling that outsiders were advised not to stay past midnight. Most posts ended the same way. Don't be there when the year changes. I rented a room above the closed hardware store. The owner, an elderly man named Walter, handed me the key without smiling. "You leaving before midnight?" he asked. "I'm staying through New Year's," I replied. His face tightened. No one stays on purpose. That night, the town felt alert. Not lively. Not festive. Alert, like a hunted animal sensing a trap. There were no decorations. No countdown banners. No music drifting from houses. Just lights on behind curtains and the faint hum of generators, as if the town expected something to fail. At 11:30 p.m., I walked the main street. Shops were closed, but people stood inside their homes, watching through windows. Not celebrating, waiting. At 11:57 p.m., the siren began. It wasn't loud at first. Just a low, mournful wail rising from somewhere near the old water tower. The sound vibrated through the ground, through my chest, through my teeth. It felt less like a warning and more like a signal. Doors began to open. People stepped outside, slowly, in silence, gathering in the street. Entire families stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the clock mounted above the town hall. The clock read 11:58. A woman near me whispered, "Please let it move." I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer. The siren stopped at exactly 11:59. The town hall clock ticked. Once. Twice. Then it stopped. Midnight never came. No fireworks. No cheers. No change in the air. Just silence. A child began to cry somewhere behind me. Minutes passed. Then something impossible happened. The clock hands moved backward. 11:58. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People began backing away from the street as if the clock itself were dangerous. Walter grabbed my arm. His grip was trembling. "Don't look away," he said. "If you look away, it notices." "What notices?" I demanded. His eyes never left the clock. The year. The temperature dropped suddenly. Frost crept across windows. Breath fogged the air. The siren began again, this time distorted, uneven, like it was struggling to function. Then people started disappearing. Not violently. Not dramatically. One moment a man stood beside his wife. The next, the space beside her was empty, his boots left behind in the snow. She didn't scream. She just whispered. "Not again." Panic spread, but quietly, like a disease people were afraid to acknowledge. No one ran. No one shouted. They simply backed into shadows, clutching loved ones. I watched a teenage boy flicker, like a faulty image on a screen, his body briefly transparent, showing the buildings behind him, before snapping back into place. He looked at his hands in horror. "I don't feel my birthday anymore," he said. The clock struck 11:57 again. The siren cut out abruptly. And the town reset. Lights blinked. The cold lifted. The snow vanished from the street, replaced by dry pavement. People were gone, except for me and Walter. The clock read 11:30 p.m. Walter let go of my arm. "You see now," he said quietly. "Why no one celebrates." My phone buzzed. The date read December 31st. The year had not changed. Walter turned toward the water tower. "They don't tell outsiders," he said. "But every year, the town has to give something to move forward." "Give what?" I asked. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. "Time," he said. "Or people." In the distance, the siren began again. The siren began again at 11:57 p.m. But this time, it wasn't coming from the water tower. It was coming from everywhere. The sound seeped out of the ground, the walls, the sky itself, warped, stretched, wrong, like time screaming as it tore open. The streetlights flickered in sequence, popping one by one until only the town hall remained lit, glowing pale and sickly. Walter grabbed his coat. "It knows you saw it," he said. "And now it wants you to understand." We moved toward the town hall as doors reopened all along the street. The people returned, but something about them was different now. Their movements were slower, eyes hollowed out, faces drained of urgency. They had lived this night too many times. Inside the town hall, the clock was ticking again, but backward. A crowd filled the room in silence. At the front stood a long wooden table covered in old documents, photographs, and objects that looked misplaced. Children's shoes. Wedding rings. Watches frozen at midnight. Walter pushed a ledger toward me. "Read the names." I opened it. The dates went back more than a century. Every December 31st was listed. Next to each date, names. One name at first. Then two. Then entire families. "What is this?" I asked. "The ones who paid," Walter said. "The ones who didn't survive the reset." The truth came out in pieces. Raven's Hollow was built over something ancient, not a creature, not a demon, but a rupture. A place where time itself fractured decades ago during a mining collapse on New Year's Eve. The town didn't just lose miners that night. It lost the future. The year never fully ended here after that. Midnight became unstable. The calendar jammed, looping endlessly unless it was corrected. So the siren, I started. Is the warning, Walter finished. And the offering. At 11:59, the town must give the year something it can't replace. Someone whose time still matters. Someone who remembers what tomorrow feels like. The room grew colder. The clock slowed. Walter stepped back. You don't belong to Raven's Hollow, he said softly. That makes you valuable. The meaning hit me all at once. The crowd turned. No anger. No cruelty. Just resignation. Hands closed around my arms, guiding me, not dragging, toward the stairs beneath the town hall. I saw children being ushered away, eyes shut. I saw elderly residents crying silently, knowing the year would move on again, because it always did. Below the hall was a chamber carved directly into stone. At the center, an old mine shaft sealed with iron bars. And inside it, light. Not fire. Not electricity. A pulsing glow that moved like breath. The clock above struck 11:59. The siren stopped. The light flared. I screamed as the ground shifted, the air thickening like syrup. My memories flooded my head, birthdays, mornings, unfinished plans, being pulled. The year was taking me. Then something unexpected happened. Walter stepped forward. I'm tired, he said quietly. The crowd gasped. I've been here too long, he continued. I don't remember what comes next anymore. He looked at me once. Someone should. Before anyone could stop him, he unlocked the gate and stepped into the light. The clock struck midnight. The siren died. The year moved forward. The light vanished. The mine shaft collapsed inward, sealing itself forever. I woke up on the street at 12:01 a.m. Fireworks exploded overhead. Music played. People cheered. Raven's Hollow celebrated like any other town welcoming the new year. But Walter was gone. The ledger was blank. The water tower siren, silent. I left at dawn. Months later, I tried to find Raven's Hollow again. It wasn't on any map. Online mentions were gone. But every New Year's Eve, at 11:57 p.m., my phone glitches. The date flickers. The sound of a siren echoes faintly through my speakers. And for 3 minutes, time feels like it's holding its breath. Waiting to see. Who remembers? How the year is supposed to end. Story 7. The night the calendar refused to turn. The town of Ashford Glen had a tradition no one talked about openly. Every December 31st, just before midnight, everyone checked their clocks. Not to celebrate. To make sure they were still moving. Ashford Glen sat far from highways, tucked between frozen farmland and a river that never fully thawed. Outsiders described it as quiet. Locals knew better. Quiet meant listening. And the town was always listening. I arrived 3 days before New Year's Eve to document small-town holiday traditions for a regional paper. Ashford Glen wasn't on my original list, but a librarian in the neighboring county had leaned close and whispered, if you want something real, go there before the year ends. She refused to say more. At first, the town seemed disappointingly normal. Christmas decorations still hung from porches. Storefronts advertised end-of-year sales. Children played in the snow. People smiled when I passed. But every smile lingered half a second too long. And every conversation ended the same way. You staying through New Year's, they'd ask. When I said yes, the smiles vanished. On my second night, I noticed something wrong with the clocks. Every clock in town showed a slightly different time. The diner wall clock ran 5 minutes slow. My hotel room clock jumped forward in sudden jerks. The church clock tower didn't move at all. When I asked the desk clerk, she shrugged nervously. "Time sensitive here," she said. "Always has been." That night, I woke to the sound of pages flipping. Someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I froze, heart pounding, until I recognized the figure as an elderly woman in a long coat, her face blurred like it couldn't decide what year it belonged to. "You shouldn't be asleep yet," she said gently. Then she was gone. The next morning, the hotel lobby was crowded. People whispered urgently, clutching watches, phones, anything that measured time. A man slammed his wristwatch against the counter, shouting that it had stopped breathing. "Breathing?" I asked. He stared at me like I was the crazy one. "You'll hear it tonight," he said. "Ticking sounds like lungs." No one worked after sunset on December 31st, businesses closed early. Streets emptied. Families gathered indoors and drew their curtains tight. The entire town prepared not for a party, but for endurance. At 11:30 p.m., the air changed. The wind died. Snow stopped falling mid-descent. The river froze solid in seconds, its surface cracking like glass. And the ticking began. It wasn't coming from clocks. It came from the ground. A slow, rhythmic pulse, echoing through basements and floorboards, syncing with heartbeats. Every tick felt like pressure behind the eyes, urging something forward. I stood outside, recorder shaking in my hand, watching lights flicker on across town in a pattern that felt deliberate. At 11:50 p.m., doors opened. People stepped onto their porches holding calendars. Not phones. Not watches. Calendars. They began tearing pages off slowly, carefully, counting aloud. 29, 30. Some were crying. Some were smiling. A few tore pages violently, like they were trying to escape the paper. I asked a man what would happen at midnight. He didn't answer. He just held up his calendar. The year ended 3 pages early. At 11:59 p.m., the ticking became deafening. The air vibrated. My vision doubled. I saw the town flicker, buildings briefly replaced by older versions of themselves, then newer ones, then nothing at all. People screamed as their calendars began tearing themselves, pages ripping away faster than human hands could move. "Stop counting," someone yelled. Too late. Midnight arrived. Nothing happened. No fireworks. No cheers. The clocks didn't strike 12. They struck 0. Every clock face in Ashford Glen went blank. And the ground beneath us shifted backward. I watched a house across the street collapse into its earlier shape, paint peeling backward, windows sealing shut, decorations vanishing. A child screamed as she became taller, then shorter, then gone. The river reversed. The sky darkened into something thicker than night. A voice rose from everywhere at once, deep, patient, exhausted. "The year is unfinished." People fell to their knees, begging. "We counted," they cried. "We always count." The voice responded coldly. "You missed days." I felt myself being pulled, memories sliding out of order. My birthday vanished. A graduation blurred. Entire weeks erased like chalk from a board. Someone grabbed my arm, the elderly woman from my room. "You don't belong to this year," she whispered. "Run." Behind her, the town folded inward, streets looping, calendars shredding themselves into the air like snow made of lost time. I ran. I don't remember how long. I woke on the highway at dawn. January 1st. My phone worked. My recorder was intact. But when I checked my notes, Ashford Glen was listed as closed permanently. Reason, temporal instability. And in my bag was a calendar page I never owned. December 32nd. The horror escalates and fully concludes the nightmare of Ashford Glen. I tried to forget Ashford Glen. For weeks after New Year's Day, I convinced myself it had been stress, isolation, maybe even a shared hallucination brought on by exhaustion. My editor said the recorder audio was corrupted. The highway cameras showed nothing unusual. Official records listed Ashford Glen as a town that had been quietly dissolved decades ago due to administrative consolidation. But the calendar page stayed. December 32nd never yellowed. Never tore. Never aged. And every night at exactly 12 a.m., it made a sound. A soft inhale. Followed by a ticking exhale. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Emails began arriving from strangers, short, panicked messages asking if I had been there too. People from different states. Different years. All describing the same town. The same clocks. The same counting. One message stood out. It was from the elderly woman. Or at least, it used her name. You ran when you shouldn't have, it read. The year is still unfinished. Attached was a map. Not of Ashford Glen. Of everywhere the missing days had gone. I realized the truth too late. Ashford Glen didn't erase time. It stored it. Every missed moment. Every forgotten year. Every day people wished away. The town existed to hold what the world refused to live through. That was the bargain. And New Year's Eve was the audit. I returned in early February. The highway exit was there again. The snow was untouched, as if the world had been paused mid-fall. Ashford Glen stood exactly as I remembered, except every building looked newer than it should have. Fresh paint layered over rot. Windows reflecting skies from different seasons. People walked the streets calmly. Too calmly. I recognized some faces from photographs I'd researched, residents who should have been dead for decades. They hadn't aged. They hadn't lived. They had been paused. The elderly woman waited for me outside the hotel. You came back, she said, disappointed. You lied, I told her. You said I didn't belong to the year. She smiled sadly. You didn't. But you do now. Inside the town hall, the ticking was unbearable. The walls were lined with calendars, thousands of them, each missing different days. Some were torn violently. Others had been carefully removed, as if mourned. At the center of the room stood the thing that spoke at midnight. It wasn't a creature. It was a mechanism. A massive, living calendar made of bone, paper, and memory. Dates etched into flesh. Years breathing in and out like lungs. Faces pressed into its surface, mouths open in silent screams as seconds passed through them. The year is unfinished, it said again. I understood then. Ashford Glen only collapsed when people stopped counting honestly. When they rushed time. When they wished their lives away. The missing days had to be replaced. By who? I asked. The room answered. By witnesses. Hands grabbed me. Not violent. Not cruel. Just inevitable. I felt days pouring out of me, days I had ignored, wasted, slept through. Moments I wished would end. Time I thought didn't matter. The calendar page in my bag tore itself free and floated toward the machine. December 32nd slid into place. The ticking slowed. The town sighed. When I woke, I was back on the highway. It was still January 1st. But this time, the world felt heavier. People everywhere complained the year felt longer than it should. That time dragged. That days didn't move right. Ashford Glen never appeared again. But every New Year's Eve, just before midnight, clocks hesitate. Calendars feel warm. And somewhere beneath the world, a town listens, waiting to see if we count honestly this time. Because if we don't, it will take the days itself. And next year, there will be fewer left.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terramouth.